All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I just want to thank everybody for attending. I appreciate you all sticking around for the last talk of the day. This is a shorter talk. They've allocated half an hour for it. I'd especially like to thank people who drove in locally. I know leaving at 5 versus 5:30 can make a big difference when driving home, especially in Boston traffic and everything happened with the marathon. But with that said, we're going to be talking about hacking back and why I feel it's a bad idea. Don't like to mince words. A little bit about me. My name is Maske. I've worked in IT for about 12 years, 7 of which have focused in information security. I've been fortunate to work both sides of the coin, both as a security consultant, performing pen tests, vulnerability assessments. I dabbled in audit for a couple of years. And I've also worked internally. I started as a generalist, made my way around an IT department, and eventually landed in security. I'm currently a security engineer for a Fortune 1000 company, where we provide oversight for most IT initiatives and projects. If anyone wants to talk to me afterward, certainly give me an email. I have the generic account IT Security on Twitter, and I occasionally blog at securityramblings.com. This is also my first talk at a conference, so definitely please fill out the surveys. I'd greatly appreciate the feedback. So just a disclaimer, the opinions expressed here are my own and don't necessarily represent those of my employer, any group I'm affiliated with. This talk is intended to provoke thought on the subject of hacking back and is not intended as advice for your business. Every business is a little bit different. You want to make sure you do due diligence on anything you do, and you want to determine what's best for your business when determining how to respond to an attack. So first of all, what is hacking back? The idea of hacking back has really exploded over the last 18 months or so, but it's not really a new concept. I was able to find articles dating back as early as the early to mid-90s. I actually found about 1,000 articles between 96 and 2002, although in comparison there were about 6,000 articles in the last 12 months, which is almost 7 times as many that were in 2010. There's also been a number of different talks at conferences lately. I believe the first one that I saw was about 2 years ago. I think it was here at Source. Talks range from techniques to hack back effectively to how to get away with it legally. But really what seems to be lacking is a discussion on really should we be hacking back to begin with? Should we be entertaining this idea as a business? But before we go any further, we really need to have a definition. So in my mind, the way we operate, hacking back is the act of using offensive techniques to retaliate for a real or perceived attack, the use of offensive techniques and attempts to gain access to an attacker's system for the purpose of either alleviating that attack or profiling the attacker. With that said, hacking back does not equal active defense. Not everybody agrees on this definition, but for our purposes, we're going to make the differentiation between the two. They do have some things in common, and you can make the argument, but we're going to draw the line at the perimeter. Anything that you would consider in-house, that you control, honeypots, tar pits, or any other equipment, we're going to consider that active defense. The moment you start leaving your perimeter, leaving your own equipment that you run and maintain, at that point, you're taking an offensive stance. You're willfully accessing something that doesn't belong to you, and really you're no longer defending your own network. Excuse me. So the first issue with hacking back I want to touch on is the legal repercussions. Not all lawyers agree on whether there's legality in hacking back. I've seen some talks at different conferences given by legal counsel on how to get away with it, how you should structure your hacking back program. However, the one thing that they do seem to agree on is that most seem to be of the opinion that any action that you take that can be perceived as an act of revenge and has no other purpose other than to injure the attacker, it is considered verboten. In a court of law, saying that they attacked me, so I'm upset and I'm going to attack them back, is at the best considered vigilantism. And really, an eye for an eye is not going to be viewed favorably by a judge. Some people argue that there's loopholes, that some have argued that you can put a banner up on your web page or on some perimeter device saying that by accessing our systems without our permission, you're authorizing us to respond or retaliate. But realistically, that doesn't seem to hold up in a court of law. Spoke with a couple lawyers on their opinion, and they said it's creative, but not very effective in real life. And really, there's a lot of interpretation in computer law right now, especially with like the Computer Abuse and Fraud Act. You look at cases like Aaron Schwartz, where he was looking at 30+ years in jail. You don't want to leave yourself open to taking action on a law that has so much interpretation behind it. You look at like Andrew Onheimer, and he was effectively getting 3.5 years for more or less enumerating a URL. Next, I want to touch on attribution. Attribution is probably the single most compelling argument against hacking back. I really can't stress this enough. It's easy enough to find an IP, but there's no guarantee that the device that you're looking at is attached to the attacker. There are millions of compromised systems out there. There's numerous ways to obfuscate or mask your origin. We've all heard stories of people whose neighbors have connected to their Wi-Fi, either downloaded kiddie porn or sent emails threatening others, and it's the subscriber who pays for that service who has the police show up at their house. I mean, it's usually tracked back to them, but with something like that, these people aren't even attempting to hide who they are. So it's unlikely that you're able to successfully attribute an attacker to the actual, attribute an attack to the attacker. It might be possible to track down if you hire someone who's a computer forensics expert. They may be able to find the true origin, but realistically, the effort, the expense required to have a limited amount of certainty really just doesn't pass the cost-benefit test. Really, the last thing that you want to end up doing is attacking a grandmother because she clicked on the wrong link. And this is really only going to get more important. You look at things like NATO recently commissioned the Talon Manual. Oops. Let's see, I lost my cursor. Huh? There we go. Sorry about that. But recently, the NATO commissioned the Talon Manual, which is really just an interpretation of existing law as it relates to cyber warfare. But it's strictly stated that it's possible to respond to an attack with a kinetic force. NATO clearly stated that they're not going to take these sort of steps, but these are based off of existing laws. If one organization interprets it this way, there's nothing that's saying that another won't and actually take action on that. We're not always necessarily the good guys, and bad guys tend to make their own interpretations as well, and could potentially use the same justifications to retaliate for what they perceive to be an attack. But even if you know for certainty who is attacking you, quite simply, you're not that good. I don't really know any other way to put it. Currently, how many people work in defensive positions and have participated in a CTF at a conference? 3 or 4 maybe. They're relatively difficult, and they're intended to be. And if these are not skills that you're keeping up and they're not part of your job, it can be very difficult to achieve on that. And if you're having difficulty with the CTF, there's not going to be that much difference in a real world situation. In many cases, CTFs are designed to be 2v1, where in a real life situation, you may or may not be able to get to the goal. And another quick question. Is there anybody here who has internal pen testers who test just their company as part of their IT department? Not too many. And it's uncommon and it's realistic. That's not your job. It's not what your department does. And what it comes down to is it's your team's job to defend your network and not chase down the bad guys. If you happen to have someone on the payroll that does have the skill set, perhaps you can be better at utilizing their skills to test your network. If people are getting in with low-hanging fruit, and you do have people on your team who are capable of simulating attacks, then really there's no real reason not to be performing those types of tests internally. But in general, you have better things to do. If you're at the point where you're considering hacking back, you're at the point where you're admitting that you've been compromised. You've been hacked, and you've made the decision that you are going to hack back. Rather than waste valuable time and resources with retaliatory measures, even if your sole purpose is to find out who's attacking you and why, your first duty is really to your business, and the first course of action should be to secure environment, enact your incident response plan, expel the attacker assuming they're still there, and really clean up the damage. Once all that's done, it's still advisable to put together a lessons learned document. It's easy enough to restore your environment to its original state, especially if you're highly virtualized, but you really need to take appropriate measures to make sure that similar incidences don't happen in the future. So. And let's say you've covered everything and you decide to go after the attacker anyway. Recently, I was actually listening to a Risky Business podcast, and Dan Gear was the guest, and he actually really surprised me, saying that he didn't really see an issue with hacking back. But if you go back and listen, one thing that got in a debate with someone the other day, really he was quantifying it by saying, if you're doing absolutely everything you're supposed to do and everything that's expected of you, and you've notified law enforcement and nothing is happening, then he sees a case for it. But realistically, even if you're at the point, I understand what he's saying, but really what business is actually doing everything they're supposed to do. When I was a consultant, I saw roughly 150 different environments, and it was hard enough to find people who were doing everything that they said they were doing, let alone everything that they're supposed to be doing. So even if you're at that point where you are doing everything right, I would still caution against it. It's unlikely that if you're doing everything right and you're working with a law enforcement agency, it's more than likely that they're not actually telling you everything that they're doing. And even if you don't see any traction with your case, by attacking back, you may actually be derailing an investigation. But either way, regardless of what you decide to do at that point, you still have the problem of escalation. Hypothetically, let's say you've done all your due diligence, you've met with your legal team, you have the full support of the business, you have a fully mature incident response plan, you've decided to go after your attacker because somehow you've determined that that's in the best interest for your company. Let's even go one step further and say that you've successfully compromised your attacker. Now what? It's the end of the day, you've performed your job, it's time to go home. But that's a problem. This isn't a job to your attacker. They don't work normal business hours. Now that they've been hacked, they themselves feel threatened. To them, it's personal. It's not just business. Even if they're just playing around, you've now touched their machine. They more than likely own that machine. And at that point, they feel like you've infringed on their personal rights. You've provided the motivation for them to redouble their efforts. Even worse, it leads to more escalation. You hit them, they hit you back, and you keep one-upping yourself until potentially somebody takes a physical action to retaliate. actually moved along a little faster than I anticipated, but there's always going to be somebody knocking at your door, jiggling door handles, whether it's a port scan or somebody just randomly throwing exploits at you. But really the best course of action is just to secure your environment, put together an effective vulnerability management program, an incident response plan, implement effective controls as your company changes and grows, not just static ones. And in many cases, attackers are going to go after the low-hanging fruit. And more than likely, you're not a targeted attack. You just happen to be the random person that they happen to stumble across, or the particular company that interests them that day. If they can't compromise your systems, you're doing everything you're supposed to do, more than likely they're going to leave you alone. You're not an easy target, and they'll move on. So, do I have any questions?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, so you actually, the part about like the NATO agreement,
Yes.
I forget what the actual order said. So,
Yep.
as an example, so, and I don't want to hear yes to this answer, but just say no if the answer is yes. So, like one of our country operations is in Vietnam, and right now they still have their own data center stuff, like they do all their own internet stuff, like it's their own physical presence. And you know they're a little jumpy, so they might decide that they want to hack back if someone that, you know, like let's say they chose to hack back against this thing that was doing something to them. They go attack this device, which turned out to be a phone device that's in France somewhere,
Sure.
in like France government somewhere, because we know critical infrastructure everywhere goes into it. We know that even more after our previous podcast. So you tell me that NATO could show up at like my company's door because we just attacked some French government thing?
Well, with this particular...
Like with guns and stuff, not like with like,
Sure.
like, not BlackBerry, but...
With this particular manual, I mean, it's an interpretation of existing law, and like our laws here, a lot of them are out of date. So theoretically, they can be interpreted that way. NATO themselves has said that they will never do something like that, but there's nothing to say that they won't.
That's kind of messed up.
I won't disagree. Jack?
Supposedly, again, trusting NATO, in the context of defined combat. And the problem is that their perspective is it's a military unit doing cyber warfare during kinetic war. Expect the drones to hit you. However, interpretation of CFAA and other laws gives us cause to think this.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, even the manual goes on to say that if you're somebody in your basement attacking somebody, you are not considered a quote-unquote cyber warrior. If you're not wearing a uniform, you're considered a non-privileged combatant, and you don't have POW rights.
And to go to similar train cyber warriors in those talent manuals, you want to wait.
That's another topic, but yeah, I would say the answer that you wanted to hear that's no is perhaps yes. You can be shot at. So
Well, they can do that.
right, it's hypothetical first.
Sure.
It's definitely a concern. This is something that we're talking about a lot in military context.
Why is this being stated by the I'm surprised that you're finding it sunny that if you attack from one computer system to another, that the government won't show up with kinetic force on your doorstep.
If you're an aggressor,
We do it all the time. The FBI shows up and does a raid. That's kinetic force. They happen not to shoot the bullets in your gun at you unless you do something else because they have overwhelming force. They don't need to.
Well, I mean, I guess one of my shocks is it's the same level of they really don't know if it is my country operations doing that attack back or is somebody that's got one of our systems called
Sure. And they run into that problem in meat space all the time anyway. Just because you happen to have been driving a pickup truck through LA delivering newspapers doesn't mean you don't get confused with the guy who's shooting cops and get shot at, right? I mean, attribution is always hard.
and with
Sure.
increased use of drones, it's even more.
Yes.
I did have a question. So you kind of carved it up into a black and white here. Don't hack back. Is there a gray though, where you're not honing the machine, you're not getting shell on it.
Sure.
Instead, maybe let's use
Sure.
It's a nice gray realm, and I like gray realms.
Sure.
Yeah, any thoughts on that?
You're right. It's definitely a gray area, and I like to dabble in gray areas at work. In my mind, that really does come back to hacking back, because you are doing something that's not within your systems. You're touching them, even if you're touching them because they did something to you, and it's an automated system. It's still something that that is unwanted on their end.
You, by the way, you agree with my lawyer.
Josh?
The lawyer on the RSA panel from Stanford, he said it's very, very obviously against current CFAA, which needs an update. And one of the things he cautioned everyone is, even though there's a lot of debate on Aaron's law as a modernization of the CFAA, none of that discussion and dialogue touches hackback. There's not actually a single discussion proposing creating new space or room for hackback. So his point was, you could take advantage of the gray area if you wanted to, with some borderland things or disclaimers, but he said you're basically deciding that your new counsel to risk being case law.
Right. So you were mentioning don't be the low-hanging fruit.
Hmm?
You're not.
Sure.
In some environments, I may agree that that is like your main thing you're trying to defend against.
Sure.
Like the main adversary is just looking for the low-hanging fruit. Then
Hmm?
maybe this more passive kind of like just make sure your defense is very good as possible.
Sure.
Point of view. I can see that. Where I don't really see it is really the more persistent type of that adversary, where maybe you really only have half a dozen people that are really like targeting you, and you need more intelligence on them. And it may not be active kind of half back, but like passive beacons, like Trojaning some of the spoils of an attack to better inform yourself, kind of reconnaissance.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, whether or not letting them take something that's potentially infected to profile them. I think that falls into one of those gray areas where I don't know that I have the right answer. I think it would be something I have to deal with it on a case-by-case issue. But as far as advanced targeted attacks, I really think that if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing from a security standpoint, if you're staying up on current defensive measures, and if you're still being breached, then maybe law enforcement is the next step. You maybe need to disclose this under certain laws anyway, but you can only do so much as you can do with the budget that you're allocated. So at some point, it does become a losing battle.
Yeah, might be kind of saying the same thing over and over again, but I guess one kind of theoretical example of this, talking about kind of the gray area, is say for instance you were to create a honeypot that basically led up to a PDF, those like company secret stuff. Yeah, that included a Trojan inside. You know, it's almost akin to like going in your house and like setting a bear trap, right, for someone to like walk in and step on. You know, they have to actively go in, take it from you, download it, and open it on their own machine. There wasn't some automated system which injected it or kind of threw something back at their browser. Where do you see that as a deployment? I know it's different, but
I do think they're two different things. I mean, having a booby trap in your house is illegal. Having an infected file on your network is not. What if they're taking something that's infected that you've intentionally infected? The argument can be made: why are they there, and why are they taking your things? But it's
Maybe different installations.
Lawyer for all of this.
Hmm?
And there are basically two different cases. One is you have an office document with a booby trap, let's say 0-day exploit.
Hmm?
And the other case is we use features that are available in Word or PDFs that basically do a callback. Like you said, there are some wonderful features in these products that do a callback. And basically, DC lawyer says if you're using features that simply do like a callback, maybe give you some operating system info, that's completely legal. As soon as you're doing exploits,
Sure.
that's no longer legal.
Yeah.
But just to add, I know that regular police in some European countries, they are pushing
Sure.
bad guys to corrupt or delete that data so that your
Yeah, but to Steve's point before, right? Like, didn't you just escalate the warfare? Because to be honest, they got into your network. Like, they got in there once already. You weren't able to stop them because you sucked so bad. So, or you not bad.
Why does everything this is a turn-based problem? Like all the wording I'm hearing, all the scenarios that are laid out, assume the attacker moves, the attacker's done, now you move. Give them the choice of pass back.
Sure.
Right? Adversaries are often an ongoing presence. What if this was a denial of service attack against you that was going to take your business offline? Do you think the basic principle of self-defense, which is the foundation of Anglo-Saxon law, would possibly come in to stop the adversary from what they're currently doing?
That's a great question.
Not gotten a straight answer from a lawyer on this one.
Yeah.
It comes back to, do you want to be case law? Right.
Sure. Yeah. Exactly.
But, so, I mean, I'll use an old so if, I'll bring it modern. So if Walmart employees start like a by hand picket line around Target, you're going to call the police to get them removed. You're not going to go out there and just start shooting them in the head.
If they start shooting at me, I'll
No, like I think that I did that outside.
Denial of service is it is practiced by many people now, is not nothing akin to a fix. It's far more akin to an assault.
Once you start talking international law, there's a lot of gray areas. In the U.S., yeah, it's hard to say. Sure. It's I've had those conversations before with people, and really you're coming back to the same arguments. You're hiring somebody to.
Can we pretend we're saying sort of Boston and be really candid where we all, well, many of us know people who do this. It's an off-menu.
Sure.
It's an off-menu entree on the menu. I mean,
Sure.
It happens. May have been in the previous source. I mean, for people that are very effective penetration testers that arguably would offer that service.
Sure. Yep.
You have to have a trust relationship with them, and they also understand OPSEC enough that they're going to bounce their GPS or two before they get there.
Yep.
And then probably
It's definitely a service that is available for hire. I really think you that.
It's happening, and what their effectiveness rates are, nobody can. It's yet another thing in InfoSec that we can't talk about.
Sure.
They can't talk about.
And I think by hiring somebody, you do end up falling back on all those same problems, regardless of whether it's kind of a set and forget employee that you have on the side or consultant, or whether or not you're actively doing it. It's.
I don't think that description ought to be on the W-4.
Yeah, your accounting department might have a problem with that, but I have 1 minute left. I know, Casey, you had your hand up for a while. Sure. Sure, it's almost a file version of Google Analytics. I mean, at that point to profile. Sure. Right. Sure. in my mind, it really can't. That's another reason why I just advocate against it in general. Because really, I mean, you could potentially gain good intelligence that would allow you to better defend yourself. But realistically, the number of issues you expose to yourself versus the value that you gain back by attempting to doing these things, really, it doesn't pass the muster. If you weigh the different options, you're not going to get enough actionable intelligence that really allows you to take action against something that may or may not be real because you're not sure about attribution again. But realistically, you can get some information, but I don't know that it's sufficient to go up against all the different risks associated with it. So thank you everyone again. I greatly appreciate it. And